The man at table 9 said something in Mandarin, and the entire room went quiet. Not because anyone else understood. Because of the way he said it, low, deliberate, with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been corrected in his life. Odessa Pemberton didn't flinch. She set the water carafe down on the edge of the table, smoothed the front of her uniform with 2 fingers, and smiled the way her grandmother taught her. Not to show warmth, but to show that she was still standing. "I'll give you a moment with the menu," she said. And she walked back to the service corridor, where the noise of the kitchen swallowed her whole. If you've ever been spoken about like you weren't in the room, like you were furniture, like you were air, then you already know what Odessa felt in that moment. And if you haven't, stay with this story, because what happened next changed everything. Odessa Pemberton had been working the floor at Hargrove Sons for 6 years. 6 years of white tablecloths and crystal stemware and clients who flew in from Geneva and Hong Kong and didn't know her name but knew exactly what they wanted and when they wanted it. She was 44 years old. She had worked her way up from the lunch counter at a diner on Bloor Street to one of the most exclusive private dining rooms in downtown Toronto. She had done it without a culinary degree, without connections, without anyone opening a door for her. She had pushed the door open herself. Every morning she took the 6:15 subway east, walked 3 blocks in whatever weather Toronto decided to throw at her, and arrived before anyone else on staff. She rolled silverware. She memorized allergies. She learned the names of the regulars' spouses and children and dogs. She learned which clients preferred to be greeted at the door and which ones preferred to be left alone until they signaled. She learned, over years, how to be invisible in all the ways that served her guests, and how to be exactly present in all the ways that mattered. What her colleagues didn't know, what nobody on staff knew, was that for the past 11 years, Odessa had been learning Mandarin. It started because of her son. Kwame was 8 years old when his class got a new student, a boy named Liang, whose family had just arrived from Chengdu. Kwame came home one evening and said, "Mom, he doesn't understand anything anyone says. It must be so lonely." And Odessa, who knew a certain kind of loneliness herself, went to the library the next day and checked out an introductory Mandarin course on CD. That was supposed to be temporary. Something to help her son's friend feel welcome. But language, once you let it in, doesn't leave easily. She moved through one course, then another. She found a conversation exchange group that met Tuesday evenings at a community center on Spadina. She listened to Mandarin radio programs while she folded laundry. She watched films with subtitles and then without. She made music constantly, and she kept going. By the time Kwame finished high school, Odessa was fluent. Not textbook, fluent. Fluent in the way that matters. She understood jokes. She caught the difference in tone between formal speech and the kind people use when they think no one's listening. She knew when something was being softened for politeness, and she knew when something sharp was being passed off as casual. She had never told anyone at Hargrove Sons. It never seemed relevant until table 9. The man's name was Lawrence Fitch. If you've spent any time in Toronto's financial district, you may have seen his name on building plaques or in the business section of the Globe. The kind of man whose net worth is discussed in airport lounges and whose assistant makes reservations 6 weeks in advance. He had come in that evening with 3 associates who had flown in from Shanghai, and a woman Odessa recognized as his personal lawyer, Constance Aird, who had been at this restaurant many times, and who always ordered the same thing and always tipped exactly 15%. Odessa had been assigned to the table herself. She considered it a straightforward evening. 4-course dinner, private room, the usual. It wasn't straightforward. From the moment they were seated, Fitch had a particular energy. The kind that certain men carry into rooms. An expectation that the room will adjust itself around them. He spoke over her when she described the evening specials. He waved her away mid-sentence twice. When she asked if he had any dietary requirements, he looked at the associate beside him rather than at her, as if the question had come from somewhere vaguely irritating, like a draft from an open window. She was used to this. She didn't love it, but she was used to it. The trouble began around the 2nd course. Odessa was refilling water at the adjacent table when she heard it. Fitch was speaking Mandarin to one of the Shanghai associates, relaxed and comfortable, and she wasn't meant to be listening, but she was there, and her ears don't turn off. He was describing her, not her service, not the restaurant. Her. The words came through clear and precise, something about her being decorative at best. About how establishments like this hired based on a kind of politics he found tiresome. About whether she'd even understand the difference between the two wines he was considering. He finished with a phrase that landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She didn't react. She set the carafe down. She walked back to the service station and stood there for a moment with her hands flat on the counter. Her colleague, a young server named Devin, who had been watching, leaned over and said quietly, "You good?" "Fine," she said. She was not fine. But she was not going to let Lawrence Fitch see that. Now, here's where the evening shifted. And if you're just finding this channel, make sure you hit subscribe, because the stories we tell here are exactly this kind of thing. Real, quiet dignity meeting the moment it was built for. Fitch called her back to the table around the third course. He was in high spirits now, the kind that come with expensive wine and an audience that laughs at your jokes. He made a show of studying the dessert menu, then looked up at Odessa and addressed her the way he might address a coat rack. Not quite at her, not quite past her. "What's good here?" he said. Before Odessa could answer, he turned back to the Shanghai and said something in Mandarin. A small aside, throwaway, another comment about her. This one was worse than the first. Odessa looked at him. And then, very calmly, in the same Mandarin he had been using all evening. The Sichuan-inflected variety she had first learned from Liang's parents more than a decade ago. She said, "The chocolate fondant is excellent. It takes about 12 minutes, so if you're planning to leave by 9, I'd recommend the panna cotta instead." Both the gentlemen from Shanghai had the fondant on their last visit here and seemed to enjoy it. The table went silent. Not immediately. There was a half-second gap, the kind that happens when a room's operating assumption gets quietly dismantled, and then the silence came down like a curtain. The associate from Shanghai looked at Fitch. Then he looked at Odessa, and he said, in Mandarin, with a formality that hadn't been present at the table all evening, "Your pronunciation is very good. Where did you study?" "A community center on Spadina," Odessa said, "and Tuesday evenings for 11 years. The associate nodded slowly. He looked at Fitch again. Fitch had gone a color that Odessa could only describe later as the particular shade of a man who has just understood, all at once, exactly how much he has said. She didn't make a scene. That part is important, and it's the part some people find hard to believe. Because we've been trained by a certain kind of story to expect a speech, a confrontation, a moment where the wronged person stands up and delivers the line they've been saving. But Odessa Pemberton was not interested in performing her own dignity for Lawrence Fitch's benefit. Her dignity wasn't for him. She told him the fondant would take 12 minutes. She asked if he needed anything else. She left the table. In the corridor, Devin was waiting with wide eyes. "What did you say to them?" "The whole room changed. I recommended the dessert," Odessa said. She finished her shift. She cleared the tables. She rolled the silverware for the morning. She took the 11:40 subway home and sat in the second car the way she always did. And she looked out at the dark window of the tunnel, and she let herself feel what the evening had cost her, because it had cost her something, regardless of how it ended. When she got home, Kwame was still up. He was 23 now, finishing a graduate degree, and he still kept her hours out of some old habit they'd never bothered to break. She told him what had happened. She told him the whole thing, in the kitchen with tea, the way they'd always talked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you know it was going to be useful when you started learning?" "I started learning for Liang," she said. "Did it feel like enough?" he asked. When you answered him, did it feel like enough? She thought about it honestly. "It felt like the truth," she said. "I think that's the same thing. What happened afterward moved in the way that things move when quiet people are involved. Slowly, without fanfare, but with a permanence that the loud things rarely have. One of the Shanghai associates, a man named Charles Wei, who had been importing luxury goods through Toronto for 15 years, came back to Hargrove Sons 4 days later. He asked for Odessa by name. He had a question, he said, not about the menu. He represented a company that was expanding its Canadian operations, opening a client relations office in the financial district, and they were looking for someone with exceptional interpersonal skills and language fluency to serve as a senior client liaison. He said, been looking for the right person for 8 months. Odessa listened. She asked the questions she always asked. Who does the position report to? What does the first 90 days look like? She had spent 6 years reading people across a dining table, and she could tell the difference between a real offer and a flattering one. This was real. She told him she would think about it. She did think about it. She thought about it on the subway home and through the next 2 shifts, and in the conversation exchange group that Tuesday, where she mentioned it without mentioning names, and the group, a retired teacher, a young nurse, a woman who had emigrated from Guangzhou, in different ways, all said the same thing. You've earned it. You took it. She took it. Lawrence Fitch, for his part, learned a few things in the weeks that followed. He learned that the Shanghai associates filed a quiet complaint through the firm's corporate liaison. Not about the restaurant, not about the food, but about the conduct of their Canadian host during the dinner. He learned that his assistant received a call from Hargrove Sons general manager, not about a specific incident, but asking whether Mr. Fitch would like to review the restaurant standards of engagement for private dining events. He learned these things the way people like him usually learn the consequences of their behavior. Sideways, through assistants and intermediaries, arriving secondhand, softened but unmistakable. There was no headline, no social media moment, no dramatic photograph. This was Toronto, not a courtroom, and Odessa Pemberton was not interested in Lawrence Fitch's humiliation. She had never been interested in that. She started her new position on a Tuesday in October, which pleased her for no particular reason, except that Tuesdays had always been her day. Before we close, stay with something for a moment. There is a particular kind of invisibility that gets assigned. They have nothing to offer, but because someone decided early on that the offering wasn't worth looking at. It gets assigned in restaurants and boardrooms and schoolyards and job interviews. It gets assigned so early and so often that sometimes the people it's assigned to begin to believe it themselves. Odessa Pemberton never believed it. Not entirely. She had her moments. Everyone does. But somewhere underneath the uniform and the early morning subway and the silverware rolling, she kept going. 11 years of choosing, in small and unremarkable ways, to become more than what the room expected. The man at table 9 said something in Mandarin that he thought would go unheard. He was wrong. Don't judge a table by its section. And don't assume you know what the person pouring your water has learned in the years you weren't paying attention. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Like this video if you believe in second acts. And subscribe to Birthright Tales, because we're just getting started.